Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Well, good morning again, and welcome back to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and of course, I am Wilmer Leon. So here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions about the broader historical context in which this happens, thus enabling you all to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. Today's episode, we're going to do a recap of a lot of the things that have occurred over this week. And my guest is going to be Jamarl Thomas of the Progressive Soapbox. And Jamarl will be joining us in just a few minutes. And while we are waiting for his arrival, one of the things we really need to look at, as Scott Ritter was talking about yesterday, we really need to talk about, there's going to be a major upheaval as a result of the Trump re-election. And one of the things that is really concerning to me is what's going to happen with the Pentagon. Washington Post has a story that the Pentagon is anticipating a major upheaval with Trump's return to the White House. And what does that major upheaval mean? Because we really have to ask ourselves, is this going to be for the better, or is this going to be for the worse? And for the better could mean he withdraws the United States from the ongoing conflicts that we find ourselves involved in. What's going to happen with the funding of Ukraine? Scott Ritter yesterday talked about a slowdown of access to military hardware. Is Donald Trump going to shift gears from the focus on Ukraine and shift that focus to China? We know that Donald Trump called Netanyahu and told him he wants this thing wrapped up. He wants the problem in the Middle East wrapped up before Donald Trump is sworn in. Many see that as Trump giving Netanyahu the green light to just go ahead and try to obliterate the Palestinians. What does all of that mean? Well, let's do this. Let's turn to my guest and find out. Because if I know anything, I know my guest knows the answers to all these questions. He is the host of the Progressive Soapbox. He is Jamarl Thomas. Jamarl, my dear brother, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. How you doing today? And I always call it Jamarl Thomas Show. I'm trying to get away from Progressive Soapbox because Progressive some of these people have lost their minds. But either way, thank you. How you doing this morning?
You're the host of the Jamarl Thomas Show.
Pretty much.
Okay, so that means you're Jamarl Thomas.
I am indeed Jamarl Thomas. I'm the host of that show. So how you doing? You doing all right? It's good to talk to you.
It's good to talk and to see you. I'm man, I got you on the show. I'm doing so well. Yesterday somebody thought I was you. So I'm doing great. So let me start off with let me pitch you a softball. Your thoughts on the outcome Tuesday, because what we wind up, I got to tell these folks, man, to stop counting, because Trump 295 in terms of the Electoral College. It was 295 to 226. It was 73 million to 69 million. Your thoughts, Jamarl Thomas?
Well, my chart that I predicted was indeed correct. Meaning, from my point of view, when I was going through the chart and I was picking state after state after state, I could not see how Kamala Harris won. Like The only state that I was curious about and I wasn't sure about was Michigan and Pennsylvania. I ended up giving Trump Pennsylvania because all of the polling had showing him winning. Michigan, I wasn't sure about because I wanted, if nothing else, even if she won, I wanted her to lose Michigan in order to instantiate this notion that you are backing a genocide and there needs to be consequences for it. Well, she lost both. In fact, she even lost Wisconsin also. This was basically a landslide.
She lost all the swing states.
Say it one more time. I'm sorry.
She lost all of the swing states. The swing states didn't swing, or maybe they did.
No, well, they swung in a particular direction. They did that. I guess my feeling of it is, all things being equal, Donald Trump, every so often, well, there are a few things, right? One has to do with Joe Biden. Joe Biden called himself a transitional candidate. He didn't get out the race. Instead, he put Harris in this position where she had a truncated campaign. So he flames out, and on top of flaming out, it becomes clear that he cannot run, and they come up with a problem. Who's going to take over? Is it going to be a situation where Newsom takes over? And then the catch becomes, okay, well, how do you get around Kamala Harris? You can't get around Kamala Harris. And instead of them having this kind of mini primary, they decided, well, we're just going to anoint her. We're going to coordinate her as the person to basically run. Afterwards, then you get into the mistakes that Kamala Harris was making, where this idea where she couldn't articulate her theme of the case, meaning why are you running, short of just wanting power. You had this other weirdness where she spent her entire time bashing Trump as opposed to, again, articulating what she wanted to do. And I think the main thing, if I had to put my finger on any one key thing, 82% of the public in the exit polling said the public was either angry, meaning they literally used the term angry, or dissatisfied with the way the country was going. The majority of those people ended up voting for Trump. Now, if the country is angry and dissatisfied to the tune of 80 or 72% with the way the country is going, and Kamala Harris is asked, okay, you're a new way forward. Fair enough. That is your theory of the case. Then what is that new way? And she couldn't articulate anything. Okay, what would you have done differently over the course of the Biden administration? Again, she couldn't articulate anything. And not just not articulate anything. If you remember, her response is, well, I was instrumental in many of the choices that Joe Biden made. And so, no, I can't really think of anything I would have done differently. So you are supposed to be a new way forward. You were given, let's say, grandfathered in that you were something new and different, considering you're a woman, you were younger, you're a person of color. And you made it your business to go around the country telling people that basically you're just continuity. You can't come up with anything different that you would have done or would do. And if you looked at the polling, for example, Kamala Harris was ahead by like 2 points, all the way up until like October 20th, 25th, and then she fell off of a cliff. Utterly astonishing. So I don't know. I mean, the reality of it is, if I had to put my finger on anything that went wrong, it would have been that. You were not able to distinguish yourself from the president that was deeply unpopular.
Let me say good morning, Ron Simmons. Uncle Ron, good morning, my dear brother. Rample Sense, hello, hello. Pauline, good morning. You know, Jamarl, I was with you I was with you in all of that logic until October 26th with what I call the Donald Trump bigoted race fest 2024. And I really thought that as a result of that 6 hours of just putrid, racist crap, that people in the country would go, oh God, no. Oh no, we can't, no. Even beyond the Puerto Rico comment. So for example, with the Puerto Rico comment, I looked at Joe Biden won Pennsylvania by 80,500 votes in 2020. And since 2020, there had been an increase in the Latino population in Pennsylvania by 650,000.
Yeah.
And half of them were Puerto Rican. So after that racist hate fest 2024, I said, oh my God, there's no way in the world that in spite of everything that I had factored, like you had factored, I said, there's no way in the world.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. I was wrong.
But you know what happened after that, though? That was when Joe Biden immediately came out and said the only people that are trash are Trump supporters.
Right.
And so the entire,
dynamic shifted.
Exactly. It's like everybody was talking about him calling people trash.
And Bill Clinton went to Michigan and tried to convince those angry Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims who are saying, you're killing our families. So all of a sudden, something's wrong with them. The other thing, I looked at the early voting numbers. And historically, when you have large early voter turnout, that favors Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't factor in was Trump used that to his advantage. He got his people out early. And to your point, so again, on that point, I was wrong. So I was wrong. At the end of the day. So man, this, we can ascribe, I think is the right term, a lot of negative things to Donald Trump, all of which are well-deserved. He's a racist. He's a misogynist. He's a convicted felon. We can tick off a list as long as our arms that he is truly a despicable human being, in my personal opinion.
Yep.
But he understands marketing. He understands the WWF, of which he was a part of. He understands, because a lot of his advisors were telling him the last couple of weeks of the election, hey man, you need to soften this message.
Right.
And he said, hey, no, I'm doubling down.
Yeah.
And he spoke the language his constituents wanted to hear.
I think that's part of it. I mean, when I was looking at the exit polling, one of the things that came up was, if you look at, that was one of the questions on the thing that I thought stood out. In fact, there were a few. One, Kamala Harris was getting people who were of higher incomes. There was that. Kamala Harris was getting people who had advanced degrees. There was that. From the standpoint of the working class, Donald Trump was getting those people. They were part of the middle class voters. So there was that part. The other part, one of the questions that I thought was pretty damning, it asked, were you damaged under the inflation that took place under the Biden administration? Basically, did the Bidenomics of that economy, how did you fare under that economy? And when the people who said we were damaged by it, like we were significantly damaged by it, those people voted Trump like 70%.
Right.
The people who said they were moderately damaged voted Trump like 50-something%. The people who weren't voted Harris. So yes, an argument can be made that he is churning out all of these racism, misogynists, and everything else. But an argument could also be made that the Democratic Party came across as elitist. Right. They came across as moralizing or superior. And Trump, for whatever reason, was able to kind of tap into this thing of, were you better off? Because if you remember, the message that he was trying to hit at that hate fest was, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?
Right.
And if the answer is no, then whatever you think of me, you need to put me back in that office. That was his message.
Right.
And if you're looking at the polling, it
resonated.
Yeah, it resonated. It wasn't that all of these people are just racist. It was more so these people were economically damaged, and they were looking for a way to deal with the economic damage, whether he could do anything real about it or not.
And one of the huge mistakes I think that Kamala Harris made was she wasn't able to articulate the message that you may have been better economically under the Trump administration, but here's what you have to understand about those economics.
Yeah.
That the economy runs in cycles.
Yeah.
And that the Trump, at least the first year and a half to 2 years of the Trump administration, the economy during those 2 years was the ripple effect of the previous administration.
Oh, right.
Because that's how these cycles work. That's Econ maybe 201, not 101. She was unable to articulate that message. Joe Biden never released her from the Biden administration.
Right.
And what I mean by that is, if you go back to the last go back to the last Clinton administration, and when Al Gore was running, and there was still all of the repercussions of
Monica
Lewinsky, Bill Clinton came to the mic and said, "Hey, that wasn't him. That was me. He had nothing to do with that.
No.
Do not tar him with that brush." And as soon as Bill Clinton said that, that freed Al Gore up to be Al Gore. Now, he still lost. We know that. But my point is, Joe Biden never came to the mic and said, it was the Biden-Harris administration. I'm Joe Biden. She was not the president. And stop blaming her for, am I right?
Well, but the problem with that is, if you remember, Harris wed herself to Joe Biden, meaning she didn't disambiguate herself from Joe Biden. If you remember when she was on Whoopi Goldberg,
she couldn't without him allowing her to do that. Otherwise, the optics of that were going to look horrible.
Well, if you remember when she was on The View, I believe, and they asked her, what would you have done differently than Joe Biden? And she said, I was in the room. I was instrumental in many of the decisions that were being made. And I wouldn't have done anything different. Now, it's fair to say that Joe Biden didn't want her to separate. Fair enough. Totally agree. But who cares what Joe Biden wants? Joe Biden is about to flame out. She needs to win. And if you're looking at any kind of polling, if you're looking at internal polling, and you recognize, okay, the public is unhappy right now, I need to do something about the fact that the public is unhappy, you could either make Joe Biden feel better, which was never going to happen. He was already bitter and upset that they basically kicked him out. Or you can win the race. You can't do both. And she chose, I guess, to make Joe Biden feel better. But there's something else too, though. If you notice, she didn't lean on any other experience, meaning she leaned on her being a prosecutor back in California. She didn't lean on herself being a senator. She leaned on, well, I was a VP. I was in the room. I was making these deals and working with Joe Biden on all of this policy and everything else. So I know how this stuff works, and I know how these world leaders are. Meaning, I think part of the problem for Harris was that she didn't really have a huge amount of experience to draw on. And so what she was using to draw on was her VP experience, and made herself as if what Joe Biden and I were one-to-one as we were doing these things to show that I have a little bit of foreign policy heft in the job. And I guess it was a double-edged sword. At least that's my take on it. I could be wrong. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not, when I make the point about Joe Biden releasing her, I'm not saying that it had to do with that, with keep making him happy or anything along those lines.
No.
When you go to some of the initial points that the Trump campaign were making, they were making her out to be as though it was the Harris Biden administration.
Right.
And that's where I believe Joe Biden should have come up and said, no, I'm the president. She's the vice president. And if he had done that, not that because everything you've said about her is absolutely right. Yeah. No experience. And the really bigger issue is an inability to articulate those points that you're making. She just can't do it. So, but again, my only point was
he did her no favors.
He did her no favors. That's a very simple way to put it. So
no, I agree with you on that.
Okay. So now what are we to do?
I don't have an answer for that one. I mean, like
the executive branch, Congress, and the Senate,
and the Supreme Court. Yep. He has it all. I mean, I guess the question. Look, I guess I am enamored by this question, and I would hope the Democrats do a bit of soul searching around it on this idea of how does a blue-collar billionaire, how does that guy who is a literal billionaire beat the Democratic Party and take the working class, and not just take the working class under this mantle that I am a defender and fighter for the working class. The guy's a billionaire. The guy's going to give tax cuts and everything else. And even the last time Trump was in office, he passed these grotesque tax cuts for the rich and increased the taxes of the middle class. My mom and I were paying more in taxes after Donald Trump. And yet he was able to usurp the Democratic Party around this idea of being the party of workers or for the workers. It is a bizarre phenomena, whereas Democrats get considered to be the elitists. And if you look at the people who voted for him, high incomes, high education, this kind of moral superiority, that just the stench of moral superiority that seems to be around them. Yeah, liberals did themselves no favors in this particular argument. As for what happens next, I don't know. Look, I did not want the Democratic Party to prosper in backing a genocide. From my point of view, you can back a genocide, but you should not be able to win a race doing that. The notion that you could pay for, give political support for, give diplomatic support for, lie for constantly, what boiled down to killing on a massive scale, ethnic cleansing, and for the administration to know that was taking place. Not to mention allow this going into multiple other countries and potentially dragging the United States into a larger war. My thought, this is an utter and complete fail. And there needs to be something instantiated into the American political discourse that you cannot win a race after you do this. Now, I don't know. I don't think that was the prevailing thought in America. I suspect it was in Michigan, or at the very least in Dearborn, where Joe Biden won 70-something% when he ran in 2020. Harris only got like 30% from Dearborn, with Donald Trump taking that city. I guess my thing is, if anything else, I'm hoping that he follows through with the not starting war stuff. I genuinely hope, if nothing else, he goes through with that. Everything else, I don't know. I mean, I consider this to be a rebuilding year in regards to the public. I'm curious from your point of view, though, what do you think happens to the Democratic Party now that they've lost? Like, Trumpism is here. It's not going anywhere. He's shown himself to be a two-time winner. But what happens to Democrats now that they lost this? Because it's not like they had a mandate, or it's not like anybody loved Harris or loved Biden. They were just voted for him as placeholders to prevent Trump. What do you think happens now with him?
Well, I've just written a piece, and it'll be out in a day or two, called "Requiem of a Failed Candidacy and Party." Jamarl, that's a very hard question for me to answer.
Yeah,
because the Democratic Party elite aren't listening to their base. In fact, this is one of the problems I saw with the Harris campaign. They ran from their base.
yeah.
The stereotype that we have come to understand with Democrats are the doves and the Republicans are the hawks, and the Democrats understand the value of the social safety net, and the Republicans with their individualist ideology are trying to do everything. Those stereotypes no longer hold.
Yeah.
Those stereotypes are no longer valid. Joe Biden started that mess in Ukraine as a Democrat. Joe Biden as a Democrat is trying to pick a fight with China over Taiwan. Joe Biden as a Democrat is the one funding the genocide in Gaza. Joe Biden doubled down on Trump's taking the United States out of the JCPOA.
Yep.
So all of these stereotypes that we assigned to the party since the 60s are no longer valid.
Yeah.
But the elite aren't listening to their constituency. So I was expecting, long way to answer your question, I was expecting Jill Stein and Dr. West to get a larger percentage of the vote than they did. I was seeing this, and maybe this is just the beginning of that trend starting to shift in that direction. But I was expecting to see a larger third party cohort than I actually saw. So I don't know what's going to happen because the Democrats don't listen. The other thing I'm going to ask you is, what do the Republicans do? Because MAGA won. And JD Vance is a MAGA convert, because you can go back to just a couple of years ago when he was comparing Donald Trump to Hitler and all that kind of stuff. Now, now I could use some very gross references. I won't. Lindsey Graham called Donald Trump a racist, misogynist, bigot, and all of that kind of stuff. Lindsey Graham is done. So JD Vance is now being groomed to take over the mantle from Trump in 4 years. What do the Republicans do?
I mean, I guess it depends on whether or not Trump. I mean, because like the Trumpism thing is fascinating to me, because Liz Cheney and many of these other Republicans seem to be lobbying in with Kamala Harris because A, they agree with her on foreign policy, but B, their thought was, if we can beat Trump here, we could take back the party, meaning we can try to get rid of Trumpism and we can regain the levers of power and control. Okay, well, that didn't work. And not just didn't work, Liz Cheney was deeply unpopular. And Kamala Harris was running around with this woman as, like she's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I suppose, if anything, Donald Trump has used a fair amount of political capital to try to say, we are going to stop these wars. I'm not going to start wars. I'm going to stop these wars. And if you think back to his administration on some level, whether it was pulling out of Afghanistan, whether it was ending Obama's regime change war in Syria. I mean, yeah, he left the people there to steal oil and wheat, but at the very least, he stopped the main operations. If you look at North Korea, where he was willing to sit down with Kim Jong-un in order to bring in hostilities down. And again, the moment that Joe Biden got back in, Joe Biden went right back to pretending as if they were going to militarily invade North Korea, in which case he started firing missiles again. So if nothing else, meaning if at a bare minimum, I hope he goes through with this idea that we are trying to put wars to bed. We're not trying to start them. The other part, he's probably going to do some of the immigration. He hit that so hard during the campaign. I mean, some of that stuff was just vitriolically racist, but whatever. He's probably going to do something about immigration. I don't know what he's going to do. He wasn't necessarily the most effective at it the last time around. They had COVID, so I would imagine that cut into the numbers. Obama was the best at dealing with the immigration issue. He deported like 3 million people. Trump didn't even come close. So they're going to do something with that, or try to do something with it. The other thing, I would imagine tax cuts, because he's a Republican and they had those other grotesque tax cuts. So I'd imagine he's going to, be a kleptocrat in the fullest sense of the word. I am super curious about Iran because they're giving mixed messages on this. So JD Vance, when asked about it, made a point of saying, yeah, there are times where Israel's goals and the U.S. goals aren't the same. Basically, they are separate. That just because Israel needs something or wants something doesn't mean it's in U.S. interest to do so. Okay, well, that's pretty astonishing to say. That's not something Joe Biden would ever say or Kamala Harris would ever say. And Trump himself has even said, look, we're not trying to have these wars. We don't need to have this war with Iran. This is not necessarily something in our best interest. By the same token, Netanyahu believes that Trump is going to be all aboard. And I suspect that part of the reason that Netanyahu was putting a knife in Joe Biden and humiliating him over and over and over again was because the thought is, if Trump comes in, Trump is going to give me whatever I want. Maybe, maybe not. I don't get the sense that he's going to get bullied in the same way that Joe Biden did. But again, up to this point, he said he's going to give him whatever he wants. So I expect Trump to be a kleptocrat. If you remember, during the first time that Trump got in and Obama, they had the debt ceiling issue. Mm-hmm. And they were like, I'm not going to put a red cent on the back of my grandchildren. That was what Republicans were saying. Donald Trump wins, and they immediately raise the debt ceiling by $9 trillion. Donald Trump passes that grotesque tax cut that basically guts the amount of revenue that the government is in, gives massive amounts of money to the top 1%. I imagine he's going to do something very similar. So I don't expect anything good out of this administration short of, hopefully, less war, which is a low bar, but I don't know what else it's going to be.
And for those who don't know, a kleptocracy is a cabal of thieves. So when you talk about Trump being a kleptocrat, what I think you're saying is, just for those who may not understand the term, what you're saying is that he's basically going to steal us blind.
Pretty much, yes.
Okay. Through through tax cuts, through imposing tariffs on Chinese.
He's going to pay back the people who got him in office and who gave him the money to get in office. So I would imagine Elon Musk is going to get some kind of good payback one way or the other.
He already did.
Yeah.
He already did.
Yeah.
What did I see? 26 billion he made in over the last couple of days.
Wow. Just wow.
I think I saw. So okay. So to the point about less war. Got it. You're right. But here's the question.
Yeah.
And I'm going to frame this as simply as I can, and I'm doing this for the sake of the point. I am not in any way, shape, or form minimizing death. Okay.
Right.
So on the less war side, I understand one of the benefits of less war is no destruction. People don't die. Got it. I'm all for it. But on the expenditure side, even though there'll be less war, those tax dollars are still going to go to the military industrial complex to restock the armament that we have blown up in Ukraine and other places. So we don't see the decision between guns and butter. What we wind up seeing is, well, you're making bullets and you're storing bullets, you're not shooting bullets. So the social programs under the kleptocracy, the social programs still get screwed.
Agreed. Like, I don't, he's a Republican. I don't think, look, I don't have this belief that Republicans believe in social programs. If they can get rid of Medicare,
and I wasn't inferring that you do, or that you were.
Yeah. Well, I was just pointing out, like, my belief is that they hate those things. They don't believe in those things. By the same token, though, 600,000 people got killed in Ukraine. And these were people who, when Zelensky got in office, if you remember, he got in on a peace ticket. So the guy that got in on a peace ticket ends up being pushed by the various people in the government, and for that matter, by the US government in the West, to engage in a war where hundreds of thousands of his own people get basically slaughtered. And so it's like, A, it was pointless. B, they had immense agreements that they blew off. C, they expanded to the border of the country itself. And D, all of these people uselessly are wiped away. And so it's like, okay, I understand that the money is being spent. Agreed. I understand that the money is not necessarily being spent on social programs. Again, agreed. All things being equal. I'm a lefty, right? I want those things to be spent on social programs. By the same token, though, between spending money and getting hundreds of thousands of people killed versus spending money, killing is worse.
Oh, no question. No question. But wait a minute. But by cutting social programs, specifically to the degree that they're to the bone that they're going to be cut to, people are still going to die.
They are.
And I don't say that to refute your point. I'm merely adding an element to the conversation. I expect the level of homelessness in this country to increase.
Agreed.
I expect the level of child poverty in this country to increase. So whether they're dying in the fields of Ukraine or under bridges in Oakland, they're still dying. And those don't have to be mutually exclusive issues. We could solve both problems. We don't want to.
Well, there's that. We not only do we not want to, but the political dynamic has it where the Democratic Party has zero interest in solving it at all. Yeah. I mean, if you remember, Harris was deriding him for wanting to make deals. Like she was, she was attacking him for it. Like, how dare he just go and talk to dictators like Kim Jong-un and Putin? And it's like, okay, so that means you want a forever war. You just want to keep fighting forever. Like, it's like absurd. The premise is absurd. Yeah, we could do both. We could solve both issues. Like you said, they're not mutually exclusive. But for whatever reason, the political parties end up breaking along these kind of weird, mutually exclusive lines. I agree with you 1,000%, right? There's this thing of the only hope that I can get out of that is that there's some kind of political realignment where people are like, okay, this is unacceptable. And I mean, unacceptable from the standpoint of war, Because, why are we giving $300 billion to Ukraine? That was the refrain that many Republicans were using, right? Why are we giving $300 billion to Ukraine when we have all of these issues here? The bridges are falling down. People are living on the streets, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, well, Republicans aren't really going to do anything about that, even though they may do something about the fact that we're dying because that's Joe Biden's war. Yeah, I don't have an optimistic viewpoint on this. I felt like I kept saying, I don't have a dog in this hunt. I didn't feel like either political party represented my interests on this. I want less war, and I think we need to attend to our needs in regards to the country itself. In fact, I would go further. Part of the reason that the Democratic Party lost many of the working class is because they could not see, or it came across as being negligible, what the Democrats were offering. Meaning the difference between
they weren't offering anything.
Yeah, right, exactly. They weren't offering anything. I mean, she was running around with Liz Cheney.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
No. They were offering an opportunity economy. They were offering an opportunity economy. And so when you ask Vice President Harris, well, what does that mean? She says it means everybody has an opportunity. Oh,
I think she said something like the American public are, what she said, adventurous, and they're great people, and they believe in things, and it's like, okay, just stop. It's like, just stop.
So you mentioned Liz Cheney, and let me make this point, and then what I want to do, I want to go over to the we're going to do a quick fire round. We're gonna talk to the listeners and answer some questions. But I think this point is a very salient point to your point about Liz Cheney.
Yeah.
Kamala Harris, instead of running around with Liz Cheney, should have been running around with Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
Instead of running around, well, she didn't run around because Dick Cheney didn't run around, but instead of embracing Dick Cheney, she should have embraced Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Getting back to the original point, you ran from your base.
Yeah.
Barack Obama comes to the stage and castigates black men again.
Yep.
Note to self, Barack, bad move. Don't castigate your base. Donald Trump ran to his base, never deviated from his base. I thought initially, I remember saying, and at the time I thought it was a very astute observation, that he never shifted from a primary, I may have said this on your show, that he never shifted from a primary campaign to a general election campaign.
No, he stayed consistent.
He stayed consistent.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, and then we're going to go over here to the...
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Democrats are the only party that turns around and blames voters when they lose. It's just Stein's fault. It's black. I mean, have you heard MSNBC? They've been melting down. They've said blacks and Hispanics are misogynistic and racist.
That's the basis of the piece that I just, it's being edited right now. That's what got me so angry was America won't elect a black woman president. Well, wait a minute. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote in 2016 with 64 million votes. She's a woman, last I checked. She didn't win the Electoral College, but she won the popular vote.
Right.
Barack Obama won twice, and I think he's an African-American man. So I know neither of them are an African-American woman, but I think that reality dispels that myth. And they need to look at, you ran from your base. You let Joe Biden hang on too long. You should have jettisoned Joe Biden in January. All of these, what did James Carville write in July? He said, we got to get beyond Joe Biden, but you cannot anoint Kamala Harris. We have to have a process, a public process, because this is what Donald Trump wants us to do.
Yeah.
He wrote that in the New York Times. So you have to look at all of those mistakes, and there are a whole lot of others. there was no policy page on her website until the middle of September. You have to look at those issues before you start talking about black people won't elect a black person. I mean, America won't elect a black person.
Well, Joy Ann Reid says she ran a flawless and historic campaign and that it is difficult for a woman and a woman of color to get elected, but her campaign was flawless. And she said even Queen Latifah backed her campaign, and Queen Latifah doesn't back anybody. I'm serious. I'm serious. I can play the clip.
No, Harrison Ford came out and backed Kamala Harris. Harrison Ford doesn't back anybody. So what?
She said even the Swifties, that Kamala Harris had Swifties.
There aren't 80 million of them to offset the what was the number? What did I do with that number? To offset the 73 million that Trump got. There aren't 80 million Swifties out there. So Jamarl, what does that say to you about the vacuousness, I think that's the right word, of analysis from the mainstream? That's just utter idiocy.
Yeah. They're absolving themselves of responsibility for failing. And they did the same thing with Clinton. If you remember, Clinton, in the book Shattered, they were talking about how Clinton couldn't accommodate any notion of blame or reflection on the fact that she lost. It was Jill Stein, it was Comey, it was the Russians, add in any other random person that you want to add into it. And it sounds like what they are coming up with is this kind of stab in the back myth that, well, no, she didn't lose because of anything that she did wrong in the campaign. She was flawless and historic. And it's because of these misogynistic black men, these misogynistic Hispanics, this racist country that doesn't necessarily want a woman. They said the same thing on The View, where the woman was pointing out, well, the reason these Hispanics voted for them because they're on the border and it's an issue. And it was like, no, they're just misogynistic. They're just misogynistic. That seems to be the argument that they're coming up with to explain it, ignoring the entirety of the exit polls that make it very clear on why people voted one way or the other. And one more thing, identity politics. So there's a black woman, I think she was on MSNBC. Did you see that? She made this argument that we need to double down on identity politics, that's not really the issue, that really we need to hit it harder because everybody has an identity and that identity needs to be validated. And so we need to go further into identity politics. They're taking the wrong lessons from this.
First of all, a lot of those misogynistic Latinos, they're working.
Yes.
They're working. And they may not, I'll put it this way, and they're working in a number of stratas throughout our economy.
Yes.
And so when you add, and for a very long time, a lot of Latinos tended to be Republican.
Yep.
So there's real data here that shows long before you get to Latino misogynism, they're working.
Yeah.
Which means what? They're paying attention to the economics.
That's right.
Which means what? Bidenomics means nothing to them. So Jamarl, that type of foolishness that you've just articulated is why I can't answer the question, what is to become of the Democratic Party?
Yeah. Because
they're drunk. They're at the bar and they don't get it. And they still believe that just every 4 years they can come out to black churches, pat us on the head, and tell us that we need you. We need you.
Yep.
But politics is about policy output.
Right.
Oh, okay. Here's an example. Women's right to health care.
Right.
A woman's right to choose. Barack Obama ran on that twice. Was elected. Didn't deliver. And that was the Obama Biden administration. Ran on it twice, didn't deliver. Joe Biden ran on it in 2020. Biden-Harris didn't deliver.
Mm-hmm.
Kamala Harris running on it. Why should people believe the fourth time you're telling me this story that because it was more valuable to them as a political talking point than a solution? What do you think would have been the response if she had been able to run and say, whether it was under Obama or whether it was under Biden, we saved Roe v. Wade instead of we're going to? Jamarl.
I mean, if you think of, for example, the political impact of when they saved the auto industry, and one of the main talking points that they were using when they were running in the races, we saved the auto industry. We saved the auto industry. Basically, we said we were going to do something. We did it. Full stop. And, when Obama got in, he said, well, this is not my main priority right now. But they asked him about it. This is not my main priority. I got other things that I need to do. Okay, fair enough. You had other things you needed to do. There's a difference in doing something and then after the fact saying, this was our promise. We accepted our promise. $15 an hour minimum wage. I'm still salty over that because Joe Biden, if you remember when he was running, he said anything under 15 is a starvation wage. These people, it was during COVID. He said these people are risking their lives in order to get out here and do the jobs. White collar jobs have the ability to work from a home or an office, but the people who are working in these companies or factories, they can't do that. $15 an hour is a starvation wage. They're our heroes, and we need to do something about our heroes. And Joe Biden gets in office, and within a very short period of time, the $15 an hour goes away. Nobody brings it up. They blame the parliamentarian, despite the fact that when Republicans had an issue with the parliamentarian, they just fired her. This time around, they were like, well, parliamentarian, they can't do anything about it. So sorry, but the $15 an hour minimum wage, that's a starvation wage. We can't do anything about it. This idea of them being heroes went away. Like, I'm super salty about that. My mom went her entire career without making $15 an hour. And the amount, it doesn't sound like much, but it is dramatic if you're not making that. And you're making like $12 and $10 most of the time. I mean, many of the people who are working at fast food restaurants, it's like 30% are like in their 30s or 40s. So this would have had impact, and it would have been something you could have pointed to saying, we put more money in your pockets. That's what we did. We said we were going to do it. We did it. I don't know what it looks like when over and over again, you're promising people stuff and don't deliver. And after a while, people are just going to say, well, they do this every 4 years, which is going to, depress the voting base.
And to that point, if you're a household and every month you've got the water bill, the electric bill, and the phone bill, and you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay those three.
Right.
If raising your minimum wage $3 an hour takes one of those issues off the table, you're breathing a sigh of relief.
Yep.
Now, to those who never have that concern, the bill comes every month. I pay the cable bill. I pay the phone bill. I pay my car note. I pay my car insurance. Well, okay. But not everybody, to your point, not everybody's living like that.
No.
Let's go to a couple of our loyal viewers here. Gotta Go wants to know, as Black men in America, how do you see global tensions and the possibility of war impacting Black communities specifically? Jamarl Thomas.
I gotta be honest, I'm terrified of the potential for war because that's not a Black issue, that's an everybody issue. If you get a situation where the U.S. gets dragged into a war because Joe Biden doesn't have the capability of not giving weapons or using diplomatic pressure or effectively just saying, you're not getting any more money on weapons. That affects everybody. If Israel decides to drop a nuke because Iran hits them after being provoked, that's a big deal. Well, same thing with Ukraine. If you get in a situation where the US or NATO decides, well, we're going to invade Western Ukraine. Okay, that's a massive deal. All of that stuff is a red line. If they would have made the decision to fire weapons into Russia, again, that is a massive deal. We're talking about a larger war that could go nuclear. That is not an issue of me being Black that's not an issue of anybody's race or identity. That's an issue for all of us, meaning that is a worldwide global catastrophe that we will all have to deal with. And let's be honest, the people who are at the weaker end of the economic scale are always going to be the ones that take the hit worse. So we should all care about it, not just as a racial thing, just as a human thing.
You're absolutely right. To Gotta Go Now's point or question, Brother Malcolm told us when America gets the flu or when America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia.
Yeah.
So I'll just answer your question as to tie it back into some of what we have been talking about earlier, and that is the expenditure of funds.
Right.
Joe Biden sent $8.7 billion to Ukraine about 2 weeks ago. He sent $8 billion to Ukraine, $8.7 billion to Israel, right, and almost $600 million to Taiwan.
Right.
That's $17 billion that did not go to public schools, did not go to the water system in Flint, Michigan, did not go to infrastructure in this country to repair right, roads and bridges, did not go to health care, did not go to retirement plans. It got exploded in naked, aggressive imperialism.
Uh-huh.
All communities are affected by those things. Detroit, Oakland, Cleveland, pick one. They exponentially feel the pain.
Mm-hmm.
But people in West Virginia, those coal miners in West Virginia that need health care, they feel it too.
That's
so,
right.
You're absolutely right. So Sandra says, and now it's being said that Harris's campaign is $20 million in debt. I guess all the money spent on entertainers and twerkers. Let me first say I haven't seen that story, so I don't know if it's true or not. Not to question Sandra Muhammad, but I just don't. I haven't seen it. I don't know if you've seen that story.
I haven't seen it. I mean, she's she raised like $1.6 billion.
Yeah, and lost.
Yeah,
she could have sent me some of that money and still lost, and yeah, I'd be doing better. Okay, so with nuclear threats on the rise, do you feel a personal responsibility to prepare your family for a world that seems increasingly unstable?
How would you do that? How would you do that? Like, how do you prepare your family for nuclear war? Like, do you remember in the old days they used to have those things where they would teach kids to get under a desk?
I was one of those. Desk. I'm one of those kids.
My mom was one of those kids. So it's like I don't know what you do with that. I guess look from my point of view.
Young man, I was one of those kids.
From my point of view, this is a media issue. And I always, part of what I looked at, my responsibility is to tell the truth. And what I mean by truth is to be contextual. And if you could give people a better understanding of their world, not in this, unprovoked aggression. Oh, this just happened. They hate us for our freedoms. Everything started on October 7th. Not that nonsense, but give them a contextual view of the world, then they may be more inclined to make a decision that is more sane, if that makes sense, as opposed to this American triumphalism that often infects our media. So when Trump gets elected, he fires off missiles into Syria, and you get Brian Williams touching himself on air because of how beautiful the missiles look when they're flying off to kill somebody. That's outrageous, right? I guess from my point of view, part of the power and I guess defect of media is this capability of elucidating the public. I mean, when the Vietnam War became clear to the American public, they couldn't keep it going. It was just so toxic at a certain point. Even the Iraq War at this point became toxic the moment that people realized we spent how much? what did we do? How many people got killed? And what do we get out of this? Oh, and they lied us into it. The problem is we always see that stuff after the fact. Like the New York Times will give an expose 30 years after some chaos took place. So another good one, another good example. Yeah, I guess I feel like the media has a higher responsibility to be contextual, especially on these issues of war and peace, and not just run this kind of American perspective, because I think that gets us into wars. I legitimately do. Short of that, I don't know what else to do. I don't know how you prepare your family for a nuclear exchange.
Following along the same lines of your answer, do you feel a personal responsibility to prepare your family for a world that seems increasingly unstable? To Jamarl's point, the way I have focused on preparing my family, and I have a son, is to get him to understand the power of context, the power of reading,
right,
the power of analysis, and being able to parse through Joanne Reed's BS about Kamala's virtuous, flawless campaign, and understand, because Wilmer, my son, Daddy, why you walk around talking to yourself? Well, because what I'm seeing on TV is bullshit. So I've said this before, and the first hadith in the Quran is what? The prophet is in the cave meditating, may peace be upon him, meditating, and the angel Gabriel comes to him, and the first thing the angel says is, read.
Yeah.
That's the first line in the Quran. Yeah. Read. And so that's what I have tried to do, is what we try to instill knowledge, context, and truth, so that armed with that, you can fight the war.
Right. Yeah, I want these wars to stop. I mean, like, one of the hardest things I had to reconcile was that we don't really care that much about life. And like the value set that you get when you grow up is different than the value set that's used in regards to a foreign policy standpoint. The war planners don't care about life. I mean, if you think of Brzezinski, for example, when he's thinking of the Afghanistan plan in order to bog Russia down into their own Vietnam, he got tens of thousands of people killed purely for this, stroke of geopolitical genius to drag the Russians into the conflict. It's outrageous.
Brzezinski.
Yeah, Brzezinski.
No, so I'm holding this up because you mentioned him. I reach to my bookcase and pull out one of his books, Between Two Ages, so folks can understand. See, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this is important. This is important.
You got the book, hot dog.
No, this is what happens when you read.
Right.
You can engage in a conversation with somebody, and Jamarl says, well, when you talk about Brzezinski, and what do? I turn to my bookcase.
Got the book.
And I got the damn book.
Got the book.
And I read the book. So continue.
I'm just, my mom, she's become somewhat radicalized listening to the show and all. Uh-oh. And, her point of view is kind of like, I can't believe they're okay with getting people killed through policy like this. Whether it's with Ukraine, whether it's with Taiwan, whether it's with Afghanistan, whether it's, or the Israel thing. She's like, I cannot believe that we have policy where we just fundamentally ignore life. And as I told her, that is policy. Like this notion that life is value is not honored on an international stage. There is no such thing as international law. It's the law of the jungle. And that is one of the hardest things to kind of accept when you're kind of looking at the world. All of these things from their point of view are pawns. And they're, it's a geopolitical chessboard. It's unfortunate. Maybe let me ask you this. Do you think the thing of bricks and everything else is a new normal for that? I get the sense that kind of like Rome, kind of like where we say, okay, well, slavery is a no. Rape is problematic. That's a no. That countries may be getting to the point of saying this notion of having a hegemon is a fail. It doesn't work. It doesn't It doesn't function well in the world. We need to be equals in regards to being countries. And that's where you're getting with this kind of BRICS, this notion of bringing down hostilities with like between China and India or Saudi Arabia and Iran. Do you think that the world is getting to a new norm where they're like, this is going to be multipolar and we are going to have no hegemons going forward? Give me your thoughts on that, because I get the sense that something else new is being created.
Oh, I don't think it is being created. I think it has been created.
Yeah.
I don't think we're moving towards a multipolar dynamic. We are in a multipolar dynamic.
Yeah.
I don't think that BRICS will have an impact. BRICS is having an impact. De-dollarization is real.
Yeah.
The empire, the unipolar dynamic, the United States controlling the world is over.
Yeah.
It's just that the final pitch hasn't been thrown in the bottom of the ninth. The time hasn't run off the clock in the fourth quarter. We don't get the message, but no other empire did. The Greeks didn't get the message. The Romans didn't get the message. The Ottomans didn't get that's why there was a time when the adage was the sun never sets on the British Empire. And now Britain is where you go for good scotch. I just came back. Lousy food, unless you're eating food they prepare from other countries, but they're right. So, and I think you're a traveler. I don't think you would argue with me on that point. You can get some phenomenal Indian food in London, but their food, oh my God, it's horrible.
By the way, they think the same thing about their food,
as they should.
Yeah.
So yes, it's done. And don't forget the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting when you talk about those things because they're built on economic development. Right. They're not built on militarism.
Right.
They're built on cooperation, hence the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They're built on win-win. That is an adage in the United States. That is a policy in China. Win-win. So no, I think I agree with you 1,000%. The only issue I would take with your point is I don't think it's coming. I think it's here.
It's here. Yeah.
And it's not going to change. Is America still respected? Oh, before we get to that question, there was another question about, how will the Trump victory affect the ongoing ICJ and ICC probes, as in the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court? Jamarl.
I don't think it affects it at all. I mean, the reality of it is, it's not like they're locking Netanyahu up. All things being equal, Netanyahu is going to get the protection of the U.S. going forward. I mean, and at this point, from my understanding, one of the prosecutors was out of it or something, in which case it stalled it that much more. I mean, the ICJ is going to pass a ruling. Israel is going to ignore it. I mean, they've ignored it up to this point. They're going to ignore it going forward. The issue with Israel is going to more so, it's either going to defeat itself. Look, I think Israel, they think they're winning. Mm-hmm. I don't really think they're winning. I think the reality of it is they can kill a lot of people, but killing a lot of people is not the same thing as winning a war. And at the point where you're expanding the war into Yemen, Syria, West Bank, Gaza, Iran, and Iran has shown itself to not just appear to be a dominant force in that region, I don't know how you win that. They're still bogged down with Hezbollah. They can kill a lot of people in Beirut or Lebanon. But this kind of blackmailing the government of Lebanon in order to let them steal the South. Okay, well, that doesn't seem to be happening. They seem to be losing a lot of people across the board, even to the point of trying to get the ultra-religious into the military. So I get the sense that their issues are more systemic than that. I mean, even the number of people that have left, the number of people who the economy is collapsing, like all of this stuff is happening during the context of war, not to mention the people are dealing with psychological issues from, the wanton murder and the killing and everything else. So I don't know if that issue is solved through the ICC and the ICJ. I get the sense that they're going to ignore that. I think their issues are more structural and systemic in regards to just making enemies all across the world and in the region.
And it's important. I don't think the United States is a signatory to either of those bodies.
We're not.
So that's another. We only refer to them when we perceive it to be in our interest. Right. We spoke to this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway from the Facebook user: is America still respected globally, or do you think our influence is waning? What do other nations see when they look at the U.S. today? No. Well, so some of it might depend on the particular sphere of conversation.
Right.
But I think overall, the answer, no, the United States is not, because we deal in too much hyperbole and hypocrisy. We're the bully on the playground.
Yeah.
And so, no. Your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't think you get BRICS. I don't think you get these other organizations. I don't think you get this diminishment of the dollar where they're trying to find a way around the dollar. If indeed the U.S. Is respected in that way. Don't get me wrong.
Quickly explain why.
Well,
why was BRICS created?
Oh, so if you remember, George, there was a conversation where, if I remember correctly, they told that Biden was like, well, what are you going to do? Work with China? It was something like that. And ultimately, it was like, yes. I mean, ultimately, you had the situation where the sanctions, the use of the dollar as a weapon, the U.S. was sanctioning the world, for God's sake. And those countries, especially after they stole their money from Russia, they stole $300 billion from Russia. They stole all the money from Venezuela. And those countries were like, okay, so the moment we get on the U.S. bad side, they're going to cut us off the SWIFT system. They're going to steal our currencies. They're going to completely, flagrantly ignore typical financial law that is formed over the course of these last several decades. Yes, we need to find a way around this. We cannot let any country that has a weapon that they can use with a certain amount of primacy, the other countries are going to find a way to mitigate it, whether that's a nuclear weapon or whether that's the dollar. And in their situation, they were like, we're not going to put ourselves in a situation where the U.S. can use the dollar as a weapon to destroy our currencies. I mean, look at what they did to Cuba, or what they were trying to do to Russia. They said, we're going to destroy the Russian economy. Any of those countries, all of them realize this is a fail. This is a deal breaker. And so their thought was, we're going to use our own currencies in regards to our negotiations with one another, which is what they're trying to accomplish. I don't blame them.
And folks, you remember Joe Biden saying at the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, we're going to turn the ruble into rubble.
Yep.
And now the ruble is one of the most stable economies in the world. And here's something really, really simple that a lot of people don't realize. When Joe Biden made that comment, he was expecting that a whole lot of Russians would take their money out of Russian banks and transfer their money to other countries.
Yep.
What did Putin do? He raised the interest rate in Russian banks to make it more lucrative and attractive for people to keep their money in the banks. That's not rocket science. By the way, I believe Vladimir Putin has a PhD in economics.
Does he?
Yes, I believe he does. Not only does he have a law degree, I believe he has a PhD. And Jonathan, thank you so much for that super sticker. So you're trying to play economic games with an economist.
Yeah.
You're probably going to lose that game, as the United States has lost, as it relates to Ukraine. So I just wanted to make that point. Care to share your thoughts on Ibrahim Traore and the Sahel state as a whole?
So the Sahel states are fascinating. So recently you had the situation where all of these states in West Africa effectively had hunters take over the country. And of course, people were freaking out saying, oh my God, these democracies are falling apart. Oh my God, these democracies are falling apart. When you talk to the people who are on the ground, it's far more complicated than that. Many of those governments were basically under control or the thumb of the colonial powers that ruled them once before. So example, France. being able to get uranium at dirt cheap prices as opposed to some kind of market value, or France having a larger stake in their politics. And they would call it democracy, despite the fact that it wasn't really a democracy that was working. The truth is, countries, or let's say governments, are just tools. It's a tool like any other tool. The idea being that we want to affect the will of the population to do X or Y. It's organizing people to be able to do something. But if you have a government that seems to be a, quote, democracy, that doesn't seem to work in the best interest of the people, and it seems to be imposed from above, let's say like France or the US, is it really a democracy in the real sense of the word? When they overthrew those governments, the juntas that took over had public support, not just public support. You had people running through the streets with Russian flags, or with basically down with America and down with France. And it started to spread to many of the other countries that were there. What is Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali was the other one, where they decided to, okay, we're going to organize ourselves as a unit, where they even came to the conclusion of the US needs to leave. You need to take that $100 million military base with you. What people don't realize is when we go into countries, we build military bases. And this was something Vance pointed out. He was like, when China goes into countries, they build bridges, they build roads, they build infrastructure. We build military bases. That is not the same thing as endearing yourselves to the hearts and minds of people. So look, if they can organize and make their system better with this notion of doing it for the public of those countries, God bless them. God bless them. It's not for me to tell them how they organize their governments. And if they get sick of France because France ran roughshod over the country, then France, on some level, earned it. And the idea that they were going to get ECOWAS to attack Niger, it's just outlandish. Basically, the French is going to try to get these other black people to attack other black people on behalf of the colonial master. Just outrageous. But no, however, I am all for this notion of people democratically running their country the way they want to. And I don't believe in this idea of having colonial control over these countries, especially in 2024.
And final point, Western democracy does not suit many countries in Africa. Maybe the creation of an African democracy that prohibits the involvement of foreign influence. That's a very interesting point, because I was listening to a speech by former Nigerian President Obasanjo, and he made that very point because he talked about how a lot of the theories in Western democracy just don't translate linguistically, and they don't translate philosophically. I'm trying to remember the term he used, but there was a certain word that he was using, and he said in many languages in African countries, these terms mean conspiring with the enemy. And he was saying that because their natural or cultural instinct is to negotiate.
Right.
When they have a problem, their traditional cultural process is negotiation, is win-win. It's not domination, it's cooperation. And that it's only once the West came in and artificially created these countries, artificially created these conflicts, that a lot of the problems that we see now have manifested themselves. So
no, that makes sense. And one more thing, I would also say, them being colonial countries, like this idea that they were colonially ruled, I would imagine leaves a certain stamp on the country that takes a bit to unravel. And maybe, taking over the same type of government that your colonial master, for all intents and purposes, had, maybe you need something different. I mean, maybe you need something that is independent and unique to whatever, you guys are coming up with in regards to some kind of democratic order. It doesn't have to look like the West in that sense. That's our own personal bias. No, I agree.
And final point as we get out here, Jonathan Sola, again, Jonathan, thank you for that super sticker. If the U.S. pledges to stop using sanctions as a weapon, does that stop BRICS from moving forward?
No.
Well, first of all, you can't trust a U.S. pledge.
Right.
That's the first point. You can't trust a damn thing the United States says. And to your point, that ship has sailed.
No.
The smart move would be, if this was possible, but it's probably not, for the United States to work with BRICS. But it's important to what you just very clearly, Jamarl, laid out. Why was BRICS formed in the first place?
Yeah.
It was because the United States, by using the dollar, was trying to hold these countries hostage.
Yeah.
And they now have found a way to free the hostages. And so they're not going back. They're not going back to that colonial structure, to that imperialist structure. Final point.
Patel has already come out and said that this is anti-democratic, that this is he literally came out and says, by trying to get rid of the dollar, we believe that these are anti-democratic forces that are trying to get rid of the dollar. Meaning, we don't, keep in mind, the United States, we don't have partners. We have vassals. You can't think of any other country that we engage with where we consider them to be a partner. They're either a vassal or they're an enemy. And so any country that wants to maintain some kind of sovereign control is an enemy. BRICS is going to be considered an opposition to U.S. interests in this kind of U.S. hegemonic control, especially considered they're looking at it and saying, we want a multipolar world. And the U.S. is saying, we want a unipolar world. Well, those two things are incompatible with one another.
They can't peacefully coexist.
Yeah.
Jamarl Thomas from the Jamarl Thomas Show. Hey, man, really appreciate it. Look forward to having you back.
Always appreciate it, man.
Greatly appreciate that analysis. And so, folks, again, I got to thank Jamarl, my dear brother. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you all for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New shows every week, every day, Monday through Friday. Please follow and subscribe. Jonathan, thank you for that super sticker. Leave a review, share the show, because remember, folks, I'm sorry, we're truly here for you, but we can't do this without you. Follow us on social media. You can find all the links below. Go to that Patreon account. Remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you again next week on Monday. Have a great weekend. Until then, I'm Dr. Wilmer Leon. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.